guess it was about 2 weeks ago, we started into a series of lessons on love. What is love? Tried to understand it. We talked about basically all you need is love, but we really didn't have a concept of what love was. Love could be a score of nothing in a tennis game, and love could be something that is a kindly affection. Like I love the chili relleno burrito at Mission Burrito. Be sure and mention my name, and I'll get 10% off next time I go there. But we use love in a very, very cavalier way. Love is found 348 times in the New American Standard Translation of the Bible, 215 times in the New Testament. And as was evidenced in what Dan read just a little while ago, it is used repetitively throughout the first letter that John would write, 33 times, in fact. The Gospel of John, 22 times. So the vast majority of times found in the Bible is at the hand of John. We then went on to talk about how love can only be known by the action that it makes evident. That God had the absolute manifestation of love, and he made it evident when he sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins, that he died on the cross for us. We talked about how the life of Jesus was one that was characterized by love, not just at that crystalline moment when he went to the cross, but in everything that he did, everything that he was about. He was fully concerned about the welfare of others. And for that reason, he did not succumb to sin. For knowing that he would do that, he would no longer be the acceptable sacrifice for you and I and for all of mankind. And so out of love, God did all of that for us. And we're challenged to walk as Jesus walked. And the way he walked was in one of love, one of obedience. And our love to God must be undivided. And then we built to this point last week. Like it or not, love does require action. And that we need to employ the golden rule in all that we do. Act of goodwill. Cannot injure somebody's person, character, property, welfare, whatever. We cannot in any way do anything detrimental to another and still say that we have love. In the 12th chapter of Romans, Paul points out, so far as depends on you, be at peace with all men. We realize that's clearly within our hands, that we can maintain that level of peace. Well, let's build a little bit further. In Galatians 6 and verse 10, Paul writes to the brethren there and talks about do good to all men, and especially those of the household of faith. Well, we realize that that love transcends our brother. It's really easy to love those of like precious faith, to those that we know, those we understand. It's easy to love. Or is it? Is it easy to love at all times? I have four sisters, and I have two brothers. Growing up, I didn't always love my sisters. My brothers I tolerated. They were bigger than me and stronger than me, older than me. And I tolerated them. I put up with the teasing, the tormenting, realizing that later on, I would be bigger than them. I would be stronger than them. And that at some point they would be intimidated by me and come and capitulate before me. And I speak in jest. But in all reality, sometimes it's hard to really make evident love for one another. We have to realize that even as we talked about in our class this morning, in the book of Galatians, the church is a blood-bought institution. It was bought by and through the love that Christ has for us and that he has for the Father. That he went to the cross and died for us. In so doing, He allowed us, gave us the way whereby we could be adopted in to the household of God, that we could be joined together. What a blessedness that is. To realize that we can become associated, more than associated, but we can be joined together with the saints. In Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, and verse 19, you can see the passage, at least part of it, on the overhead. But you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household. Wow. That is impressive when you stop and think of it. But also what it reminds me is that not only are we part of a family, a household, that it means that we have to be willing to grow and to develop. There is no sibling rivalry within the household of God. We embrace one another. We accept one another. In fact, Paul in the 15th chapter of Romans talked about, wherefore accept one another. Doesn't mean we accept their sins, but we do accept one another. And we work with them and we strive to help them because we want only the best. Paul stated it this way in Romans 1st chapter, beginning in at verse 11. It's pretty impressive. And we rarely go to the 1st chapter of Romans and look at anything other than verse 16, or then when it begins talking about for the wrath of God and so on. But I want you to look at verse 11 of Romans 1. For I long to see you in order that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, that you may be established. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you while among you, each of us by the other's faith, both yours and mine. Mutual encouragement. That's what Paul's talking about. The idea of giving strength to strength, or to have strength from others for our weakness. We want to have mutual encouragement. I must admit, and I even commented on it this morning, when I looked out at class and saw a goodly portion in attendance, it bolstered my spirits. Inside, it made me smile. It was great. I think back to the days before the pandemic when we would be pushing 50 in attendance. And we realized many people went through changes over the 2 years. Without opening up sore subjects, we realized we lost some. We lost some due to the loss of life. We lost some due to moving away. And we lost some simply because we lost some. And then I think back even further when we were pushing 60, on the rare occasion 70. And I realize we are a grand extended family. That we know that a lot of people move from here. Quite honestly, it's expensive. It is really expensive to live here. Cost of living is going up and up and up. They're talking about $6 a gallon for gas. Give me a break. But it's expensive. But here's the part we need to focus on. Even though we know that people move, even though we know we're separated by whatever reasons, we are still family. We still have that mutual encouragement. This past week, I got an email from Luridine. I was glad to get it from her. I heard from Eleanor, hear from different ones that have moved on. From Martha. The connection, the encouragement that they offer, just by the contact, is really remarkable. Because by and through that contact, they're saying in an indirect way, you're loved, you're cared for, you're thought of. And whether we're gathered here or elsewhere, We need to communicate that to others. We are family. I mentioned Dave Sialkos this morning. Been a long, long time since Dave was living up in the little loft above the men's restroom. That was before my time here, but he talked about it. And some of the men talked to me about it. Dave was an interesting character. But he decided he was going to go back to the Ukraine and train gymnasts. Darren Wills. We still contact those. They are still part and parcel of who we are. And just because they're not in our proximity does not mean we have any less to love. Paul here writes and said, I want to come there. I want to be with you. He had not gone to Rome yet. He was hoping to drop in at Rome on his way to Spain in order that he could be mutually encouraged by them. That's family. That's family. And that's what we have in the household of God. So then when we're called upon to be hospitable to one another, it really makes sense. Or in Hebrews 13 and verse 1, let the love of the brethren continue. We want only the best. And because we want the best, we're going to be hospitable one to another. Now, break down that word, hospitable. What's it sound like? Does it sound like eating chicken legs at somebody's house? No. Get the word hospital. That's the root word. Hospital means care and concern. Yes, hospitality has grown to take on different complexion, which we're glad to do. But it means, more importantly, care and concern. That might be physical. That might be spiritual. It might be emotional. Over the years, Linda and I have been thankful that brethren have reached out to us so that we could offer care and concern and show love. Sometimes sit down and ask Linda about the people we've taken into our home on a moment's notice. One woman I can think of offhand, her husband had choked her. When I got to the house, his hands were around her neck. He was trying to kill her. Got him off of her, told her to go get in the car with her 2 children. We took her to our home and kept her. And then ultimately got her to where she needed to be, where she could be safe and away from him. She cried so much that first night. It broke our hearts. But we were thankful that we were there. That's the hospitality that Paul talks about. Because you have love of the brethren, be there for them for times of concern. And yes, for times where you're eating a T-bone steak, not a chicken leg. How about that? Or anything but. That's what he's talking about. And that's part and parcel of love. And Peter then points out, be hospitable to one another without complaint. 1 Peter 4 and verse 9. You don't complain about it. You provide what's needed. Sometimes a person just needs a place to go to talk. They need somebody to talk to. Out of love, we need to be there for one another. Other times they need more. And sometimes they just need to know that they're loved, cared for. If I haven't said it before, I'll say it again now. Our house is always open to members of the church. You do not need an invitation. Feel free to drop by at any time if you so need it. We're there. We want to be of service. That's hospitality. That's let the love of the brethren continue. And that's what we are to do as Christians. And I do it not because I am a minister, but because we're Christians. And we don't complain about it. Yes, sometimes it's tiring. when we have people over. Linda does a lot of work. I am so very fortunate. And I think the brethren, wherever I work, are fortunate that I'm married to her because of the work that she does. She's remarkable. But now I know I'm going to get talked to afterwards because I mentioned her and her remarkable capabilities. But we don't do anything and complain about it. We're glad to do it. We're glad to be of service. In John, the 13th chapter, verse 34, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. How much did Christ love us? How much? He loved us enough to keep himself from sin. That's one. He loved us enough to be obedient to the Father in all things, in order that he could be the acceptable sacrifice for us. He loved us to that degree. But go over with me, if you would, into 1 John, the 3rd chapter. And I was kind of hoping, Dan, in his reading this morning, he got through chapter 2, but I was hoping he would get over into the 3rd chapter and down about verse 16, because this talks about the all-encompassing love that we are to have. He explains it. We know love by this. Stop a minute. Very first lesson in this series, we talked about love can only be known by the actions it promotes. That's it. All right, so he goes on to say, we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Whoa. That's a hard one. That's difficult. It would be easy for me to lay down my life for my family, my immediate family. Piece of cake. But to lay down my life for Dan, I don't know. Not that Dan's not worthy, but that's a tough one. But if I have the level of love that I'm supposed to have, it wouldn't be tough. It wouldn't be tough. It wouldn't be hard. Merlin Buck, one of the elders from Lassen Street that served, many of you might know Merlin, I think was an example of true love. He was involved in a very terrible accident. And Merlin willingly said to take somebody else instead of him, knowing that it would cost him his life. And he said, no, take the young girl. Now, I don't know all the particulars. John and Kathy probably undoubtedly know more than I. But whenever I think of this passage, I think of Merlin Buck. That he was willing to die, was willing to sacrifice himself, that another person he didn't even know would have a chance at life. Now I look back and I go, okay, well, I can understand that to a degree. Merlin was older and the young girl was considerably, her whole life was before. That one might be easy, or at least more explainable. But I've got to be of the mind that if it was between Jim Morey and me, that Jim would lay down his life for me. No, in all honesty, it comes back to me. Could I do that? I've got to say I've got to. That's the love that I have to have. And I pray that it never comes to that level for any of us. But that's what he's talking about. We ought to have that mindset. So if I have that mindset, putting the needs of others before mine, it's going to really be easy. But John's not done. He then goes on to say, verse 17, but whoever has the world's goods and beholds his brother in need, closes his heart against him. How does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and in truth. That's all-encompassing love. All-encompassing. Verse 19, We shall know by this that we are of the truth, and shall assure our heart before him. So we look at one and we talk about a philosophical, could I? Then we bring it down and we come into something that is more on a rational level. And will I? Will I help? Will I reach out? Will I extend? And I'm really quite honored to be associated with this congregation, because over the years there have been any number of times where I've seen individuals help other individuals who have been in need, not always providing money, but providing what they lacked. Sometimes it would be guidance. Sometimes it would be counsel. Sometimes it would be walking someone through the purchase or sale of real property. Whatever we could do or whatever could be done to help that person. Other individuals who have helped people out of love, to evict people that had taken squatters right on their property. So many things. In other words, seeing the need and providing for it, that's love. That's where you and I relate on a day-by-day basis. We see somebody that has a need, we're willing to provide for it. We're willing to help, we're willing to extend out and to do it. The magnitude of love is clearly made evident. So, what's really all involved in brotherly love? Yeah, the golden rule is definitely there. It's definitely there. But what else is seen? Galatians 6 chapter verses 1 and 2. Bear one another's burdens, thus fulfill the law of Christ. What does it mean to bear burdens? Yeah, we've helped people move, sure. But that's not all the burdens people bear. They bear physical burdens. They bear emotional burdens. They bear a lot of baggage. And they're going to need help with it. And that's part of what love does. Love helps. Love helps. In psychology, there's various approaches that individuals have in therapy. The one that I, over the years, have found that I think works the best is really easy. Fancy title, really long and elaborate explanation. No, it's not. It's simply called talk therapy. And it's a real therapy. You simply allow people to talk. Sometimes people, all they need is an ear. Somebody to talk to, somebody to vent their spleen, so to speak. To cast it all on to someone. We know that we can cast our anxieties onto God. But by and through the dynamic that God had with respect to the church, God said you also need sometimes to be able to vent to someone else. So bearing another's burden sometimes simply means just opening an ear up. Because more often than not, when people talk and others listen, they discover what their issues are. Here's how I can fix it. Here's what I need to do. Oh, I never realized. And you know what's really amazing? Is that when people discover it, they turn and look at you and say, whoa, you're a veritable genius. And you didn't do anything other than listen and let them talk. And they figured it out themselves. Or you direct them to a passage in the scripture and they figure it out. It's really quite simple. But that's what love's about, bearing one another's burdens, being tender-hearted for one another. You look at 2 Peter, the first chapter, talks there about all the various virtues, about the Christian nature, and becoming partakers of the divine nature. We're never going to be deity, but we can employ the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. When you begin to translate those over, that's exactly what Peter's talking about. In 2 Peter 1, verses 5 through 11, for he who lacks these qualities is blind or short-sighted, having forgotten his purification from his former sins. We don't want to do that. So we want to employ those things, always maintaining those attributes. We're not going to bite and devour one another. We saw that in Galatians 5th chapter, verses 13, 14, 15 this morning. Don't bite and devour one another, lest you be consumed by one another. We want only the best for everyone. And so we look for ways to lift up, not ways to tear down. Because quite honestly, Romans 13, verse 10, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. And that's exactly what we want. We want to comply with the law that God has put in place. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love does no wrong to anyone. Years ago, I started telling my boys, do good, be good. That's all I want you to do. Do good, be good. 4 simple words. That's love. That's love. Do good to all that you come in contact with. Be good in relationship to the God of heaven by obeying his commandments. That's it. Adam made me something a few years ago. And it was a period in his life where he was struggling with different issues. And he typed something or made something up, and it simply had on it, do good, be good. I was so impressed when he sent it. I looked at it and a tear began to well up my eyes. Sometimes you think they don't hear, but sometimes they do. And they might hear, but they may not do. And that's the way God looks at us. His word resonates with do good, be good. Go the way of love, and we hear it. And we can repeat it back in recitation. But whether or not we do it is something else. The life of a child of God is one that is truly to be characterized by love. Go with me, if you would, real quickly into 1 Corinthians 13 chapter. And we have looked at this chapter in context of our study with respect to the Holy Spirit on Wednesday night. And we look at it and we say, well, it's a chapter of love. It's also the chapter dealing with the duration of spiritual gifts. But this time I want us just to look at it because what he has done, he has taken the word love or charity, some translations, and he's personified it, given it the attributes of a person. So we've done this exercise before. So you could intersperse the word God. God is love. Word love is used here. You could talk about it in a grand scale. You could throw the word Christian because we know Christians are supposed to be characterized by love. Let's read it and throw in some names, shall we? Verse 4 beginning. Joy is patient. Brittany is kind and is not jealous. Linda does not brag and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, does not seek her own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Al never fails. Sound funny? What about your name there? Bruce is patient. And Jim is kind. And on it goes. Could you do that? Because, see, that's what he wants. If you're a Christian, if you're a child of God, we should be able to read that and not have it sound funny. I'll be honest. If I throw my name in there or read it that way, I go, boy, does that sound bad. Because I've got a lot of work to do. I've got a lot of work to do. And I need to get there. And I realize that my relationship with God is hinged on my relationship with others. I know that. So I've got to try harder and draw closer to you, which means I've got to build bridges instead of building walls. If there are walls that exist, I've got to tear them down. Because what I want to do is I want to extend out and have that bridge that extends out between one another. On the overhead, you can see the 133rd Psalm. Behold how good, how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious oil upon the head, coming down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard, coming down upon the edge of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, coming down upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, life forever. Well, that's what we want. We want that blessing of life. We want the fullness of love. We desire it. We long for it. It is within our grasp, but will it take effort? Yeah. Yeah, it will. Well, the series is yours. Later on in the year, Lord willing, we'll come back from time to time, touch on other aspects of what constitutes love. But I'm mindful that we're trying to attain it. We're all trying to get there. And we accept one another. And we realize that with help, we'll attain to where we need to be. If there is any here this morning and not a child of God, we'd love nothing more, and I use that word in the sense of how it is used colloquially. There'd be nothing greater that we would desire than to sit down and study with you, to show you exactly what it takes to become a child of God, to benefit from the love of Christ. And as we have seen through this series, love means obedience to the commandments. And Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, than one lay down his life for his friends. He qualifies it. You are my friends if you do as I command you. If you need to study, we'll be glad to study with you. Maybe you already know what you need to do. You want to make your obedience complete. We'll be more than happy to assist you.